Alrighty, hello. My name's Kyle Pazalski and I'm a photographer based here in Melbourne, but I'll pretty much work anywhere that I'm sent. So I've been shooting professionally for about 7 years now with my mate Steve, just down in the front here, and together we own Valley and Peak. So we do mostly wedding photography and videography, but we've also just recently opened up Explore Valley and Peak. And so that's a 9-day class where we take groups of people over to New Zealand and we pretty much just teach them travel photography and sort of some of the stuff that goes along with that. So I love traveling. Just look how happy I am. So I took a trip to New Zealand a few years ago, and while I was there I kept a travel blog. So there was a little bit of text with that, but it was mostly photos, and people seemed to enjoy it. So I started doing it every time I travelled. So I did some in Europe, I've done some in Asia, and quite a few in New Zealand. And so after a few of these trips, I'd started to build up a little bit of a following. And so that's when a few other people started noticing my work a bit more and paying attention to what I was actually posting. In the last couple of years, I've had my shots featured in a couple of different places. I can promise you that you'll never see someone with a filthier grin on their face than when this message rolls in. What do you write back to that one? I just awkwardly hearted it. So I bring up the travel photography stuff because I find myself in a lot of pretty remote places where I don't necessarily want to be stuck lugging around a really heavy bag of gear. So over the years, I've started making the shift to lightening that travel bag a bit. So I made the switch to mirrorless cameras a couple of years ago. I've also started reducing just the number of accessories and lenses and that kind of stuff that I'll take with me. But the big one that I could never really seem to cut back on was taking a laptop. So I still needed it for editing and I still needed it for doing backups. And that really irritated me. So I've spent quite a bit of time figuring out a way to finally leave the laptop at home. So, and while still actually being able to do meaningful editing while I'm out and about. So today I'm going to cover how I use an iPhone and an iPad to get desktop class editing done. But before I launch into it, there's a couple of things that you're going to need to get started. So the first one's an Adobe photography plan. There's a free version available, but if you really want to sort of get the most bang for your buck, you're going to need the actual plan. So it's about $14 a month, and you actually get Lightroom for mobile with that, so what we're talking about today. You'll also get Lightroom on desktop and Photoshop on desktop. You'll also get Adobe's new Photoshop app on iPad, which looks like it's going to be pretty good and fairly full-featured, and that's coming a bit later in the year. You also get 20 gig of cloud storage too, which is handy. So to run it, you'll need an iOS device running iOS 11 or later, so that's an iPhone 5S or onwards, or an iPad Air and onwards. And if you're in the Android ecosystem, you'll need a device running Android 5, so Lollipop, and onwards. If you want to do any preset management and that kind of stuff, then you'll need a Mac or a PC, and I get that it's a Lightroom mobile, of course, but this is what we're stuck with at the moment. And a card reader if you want to do any sort of importing of RAW files directly to your device. So USB-C or Lightning or something along those lines. So just to start with, can I just get a really quick show of hands of who's actually used Lightroom for mobile in the past? Alright, so there's quite a few of you, but a lot of you are sort of fresh into this. So before I get into what it can do now, I think there's a little bit of value in going back a bit to when it first came out. And just give a little bit of context as to how far it's actually come since then, because it definitely had a pretty shaky start. So it was 2014, and a lot of us had these iPads that we'd purchased as a business expense, but we weren't really doing that much business on them. They were really great media consumption tools, lots of Netflix, lots of surfing the web, but as far as media creation and actually doing work, they weren't that great. Things like ViscoCam were starting to pop up, and Snapseed by Google, but what we really wanted was just desktop class Lightroom on an iPad. And then Adobe announced it. It was going to be iPad only to start with, but with an iPhone app coming a bit later on. But they'd promised some really big things. They'd rethought the editing experience to work best with touch, and that excited the pants off me. So then Adobe launches it. And we all really quickly download it and start using it, and then sort of progressively find out that it's actually garbage. Yeah, some people had some fairly nasty things to say about it. But But overall, what Adobe had made was a really great tool for a few people here and there. But anyone that was actually serious about doing editing on the go were pretty disappointed. So this is that original app that they came out with. And a lot of the problems revolved around the design of it. It was really frustrating to use. There was a lot of back and forth between tools. There were no curve adjustments, and we'll dive into that a bit later on. No local adjustments. There was no user presets. It couldn't export anything in full resolution. Everything was fairly small. It was an app that was more geared towards image review rather than editing. So if you worked in a commercial environment, for example, and you really needed instant client review on a photo, it was great. You could go and load your photos up on the desktop. That would sync across to the iPad. You could then go and show the client. The reviewing features were actually fairly robust. You could flag and tag and rate and do all that kind of stuff, and it would sync back across. If you actually wanted to do any editing on it though, which is sort of important, it wasn't that great. And then that was it for a little while. A lot of us had one crack at the app, realised there wasn't really any room for it in our workflow, and then we stopped thinking about it. But Adobe didn't, and they kept plugging away behind the scenes and constantly updating and updating and updating. And over time, something fairly incredible happened. They actually made the app good. And they made it really good. So this is just a really quick edit through a photo. You would have seen it as you walked in. And we'll dive into these features as we go along. But you get a pretty good idea really quickly that this is something that's quite powerful. And then that's it. So that brings me to Lightroom today. What's the current state of the app? How far has it come? And what can you actually do with it now? So I'm just going to start with the most obvious change, and that's the slick new design. So here's a few screenshots that I've taken on my iPhone, but it's effectively the same design on tablets and Android devices too, just scaled accordingly. So the top one there is the new grid view, and there's heaps of flexibility here. So you can filter by ratings and flags, also by keywords, location if you're tagging them, people, it'll actually scan faces and tag people, as well as image EXIF data as well. Bottom left is a fairly typical editing view inside the develop module. So they've pretty much replicated the desktop experience with multiple sliders and tool locations that actually make sense. So it's really nice having everything sort of available there and easily seen. And so speaking of sliders, so you can see down in the bottom right hand corner there that I'm sort of making adjustments to exposure. In the original Lightroom for iPad, it definitely wasn't that fluid. You'd make your adjustment and then you'd wait. And you'd wait and wait and wait, and it would sort of take a little bit of time to make any changes. So when you're doing hundreds of those per image, the time definitely stacks up. So when people have watched me editing in the past, I'd say that the number one comment made is, oh wow, I didn't know that you could do that on a phone. So I don't think people realise just how aligned the desktop and mobile apps of Lightroom have become. So I want to spend a bit of time going through the tools that are available and showing just how feature rich it has become. So the first one that I want to cover is light. So under light, you've got your exposure, your contrast, highlights, shadows, whites and blacks, as well as your curves adjustments. And so curves are really great because there aren't any features being lost as it's come across to Lightroom on mobile. So you've got your RGB curve. You can also drill down deeper into just your red, green and blue channels as well. And then it works exactly as you'd expect. You can just tap anywhere across the line to add an adjustment point. You can add as many adjustment points as you like. And then it's just a matter of shifting them up and down to get the toning that you're after with your image. Next tab is colour. And so under colour, you've got white balance, vibrance, saturation, and the HSL mixer. So I just want to really quickly dive into these two features up in the top right hand corner there, the mixer and the dropper. So I'll start with the white balance dropper. So sometimes it's a bit tricky to know where to begin in white balancing a photo. So the dropper tool is a really great way to get started. So all you need to do is just tap that button and a loop will appear on the screen. It's literally then just a matter of dragging that loop around. You're looking for a neutral point, so a grey or a white, just somewhere for that to reference against. It's live updating as well, so you get instant, you can see what's happening there. Once you've found something that you like, click that tick and the changes will be made in your temperature and tint, and then you can fine tune that as needed. HSL mixer. So just above the dropper tool was that button. And the mixer is really great in that it lets you make specific changes to colours without changing all of the colours in the image, so specific colours there. But I just want to talk about the target tool, which is the one just up in the middle there, the little target between done and colour mix. So this one's really great if you want to adjust one colour, but you're not 100% sure which colour that actually is. Is it a yellow, is it a green? That click across. There we go. So for this example, I just wanted to bring out the colour of the trees a little bit more there. So I've tapped the target tool, I've then tapped saturation, and then it's just a matter of hovering my thumb over the trees there and just sliding up and down, and that'll change the saturation as I've gone up and down. It's smart enough as well to target colours surrounding the specific colour that I've picked. So it was adjusting my yellows and greens then, and that's just so that you don't get one colour specifically overpowering the entire scene. Next tool group is effects. And so in here you'll find your clarity, dehaze, texture, vignette, grain, and split toning. So split toning is somewhere where you can change the overall look of your image really easily and really quickly too. So there's two boxes, one for your highlight colour and one for your shadow colour. And so to make adjustments, all you need to do is just slide that dot around within the colour. So the higher up is the more saturated it'll become. And once you've found a look that you're happy with, you can then use the balance slider to move gradually between your shadows and your highlights and find a balance that you're happy with.
Can I just ask, are you using your finger on the phone?
Yeah, so this is all with my finger, yep. Unless you're on an iPad, I find the Apple Pencil works really well as well. So then there's the Detail tab. And so in here you'll find sharpening and noise reduction. And we're working with the same sharpening algorithm as you'd find on the desktop version of Lightroom as well. So if you've got a specific method for sharpening your images on desktop, that'll translate across to the mobile versions as well. We've then got optics, and this one's fairly self-explanatory. There's remove chromatic aberration and enable lens profile corrections. Something worth pointing out though is just how committed Adobe seems to be when updating this app. So I picked up a Sony a7 III when they were still relatively new last year, and the mobile app had support for that pretty much instantly, the same time that the desktop did. So they're adding in new body profiles, new lens profiles constantly. So second last is geometry. And so in here you'll find all of your perspective corrections. If you just tap on guided up in the top there, you can actually select between automatic, level, vertical, full, and the guided options. And guided is really great. This is the one that I use the most, just because like on the desktop, you can actually draw in your corrections. So I want to fix the perspective of that bridge so that it's just nice and straightened up. So I've selected my two vertical lines there and a horizontal one that I wanted to reference against, and it'll automatically fix the perspective. So the next tab is presets, but to talk about that, first I need to dive into preset management a little bit. And unfortunately, this is where you're going to need your desktop computer handy. And to make things just a little bit more complicated, I do all of my editing in Lightroom Classic, as I'm sure a lot of you do as well. This is Lightroom CC. So it's a completely different app that you may have accidentally downloaded at some point along the way. The good news is, you only need it to get your presets synced across. And so once you've done that, you can just leave it. So first step is to open up the app. You're just going to click in presets down at the bottom right hand corner there. You then click on the three dots at the top and click on import presets. Pardon me. You then navigate to the folder where you've got your presets located. Select the folder and click import. And that's it. It's really easy. So you can see that it's imported my presets there under the nested folder that I had. You can also just as easily import just XMP files if you have them. They're the same presets that you would have otherwise sitting on your desktop, and they'll just appear under user presets. So give it a second to sync everything across. You can check on the progress of that by clicking the little cloud icon in the top right hand corner there. It shouldn't take more than a minute, and then once that's done, you can close your laptop and toss it out the window because it's now useless. So now you can fire up Lightroom on your phone or iPad, and all you'll need to do is just click on the presets tab, and then that's it. They should automatically be there. Again, it might take a minute to pop across, but that's all you need to do. What was I saying? So the only time there might be a bit of an issue is if there's some sort of incompatibility problem. And the most common cause of that is if a camera profile hasn't synced across. So in that case then, just click on the 3 dots in the circle up in the top right hand corner there and click Show Partially Incompatible Presets. And so now what will happen is you can still use that preset that you've just imported and everything will work except for that one adjustment that didn't translate across, which in this case is a camera profile. And then that's fairly easily corrected later on anyway. So that's it for the basic tools. I now want to talk a little bit more about the advanced stuff, and that's local adjustments. So local adjustments is a really big deal, especially for me. It's probably the single place where I make the biggest changes to my images. So there's some really powerful stuff in here. So the first thing is the healing brush. And click that. So the healing brush is how you remove some things in your image that you sort of wish weren't there. So again, it's using the same algorithm as you'd find on the desktop version of the app. So there's no weird hard edges or anything like that. It works exactly as you'd expect. So there's both healing and cloning brush tools, as well as adjustments for brush size, feathering and opacity. And you can even change what area of the image you want to heal from too. So you can see I just sort of drag along there and it's going to put that place where I sort of made my correction. And if you're using an iPad Pro, this is where having an Apple Pencil makes it an actual worthwhile tool getting. You can really make sort of fine adjustments there. So next we've got brush and gradient tools. And this is potentially my favorite feature of Lightroom for mobile. So to show you what, I just want to really quickly take you through a photo that I took over the weekend. And the first thing that I've done here is I've just made a couple of basic adjustments just to get my sky at the level that I want. I've also applied my preset, but there's still no real detail there in the shadows. So I've already tried bringing up the shadows in the main editor, but there's no tone there. Everything looks a bit washed out. So the answer is a local adjustment. So I've opened up the local adjustments tab. I've clicked on the plus up in the top left-hand corner there and selected my brush. And then all I need to do is, I've just done a fairly rough job of drawing over the subjects there. You can then use the eraser tool to get in and neaten it up a little bit more. It's really easy to get carried away with this. You can sort of make it as close to the edges there as you like. I just done a really quick one there. And then it's just a matter of making your adjustments. So for this photo, I've bumped up the exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, and the whites. I've also made changes to the white balance, and I've added some noise reduction too. So it's a really powerful tool. Just about every adjustment that you can actually make in the Lightroom app, you can also make within a local adjustment. So it's almost like having a miniature Lightroom inside of Lightroom. So that was the before, and that was the after. So I'm much happier with that image than if I'd have just simply dragged up the shadows. So how do we bring this all together? So I've covered a fair bit already. We're only 17 minutes in. I now want to give you a bit of a demonstration on how all these tools can sort of be brought together on one single image. So that's my starting point. It's a photo that I took at Milford Sound a little bit earlier this year. Pardon me. And I've picked this one specifically because Milford Sound is a massive pain to edit. You've got a lot of mixed lighting. There's also mixed color temperatures in there as well. So even on a desktop, it can be rather tricky to get balanced. So the first step is to fix my white balance. I always err more on the side of warmer photos. Your mileage may vary. I've then applied a selective edit using the brush tool. And so on that brush, I've then brought up the exposure and the shadow slightly. And that's just to separate the subject from the background there. So it's already looking a bit more balanced. Now seems like a good time to add in my preset. And so once it's added, it saved the sky a little bit, but there's still a fair bit of work to do. So I've added in another local adjustment, this time using the gradient brush. And the gradient brush works exactly as it does on desktop. So it's literally just a matter of dragging your finger down across the image, and that'll apply a gradient mask. So it starts off darker and gets lighter as you progress through. I've then masked out the subject using the eraser. And so inside of that adjustment, I've then also brought down the exposure of the sky, and I've pulled back the luminance in the blues using the HSL mixer. So remember, this has only been applied to that local adjustment that I've just made. So everything outside of that gradient is untouched. This is only applying to what's inside of it. I've then come out and I've made a crop adjustment. And so crop is, again, exactly the same as on desktop. You've got aspect controls, rotating and flipping the image, as well as a straightening tool. So you can just draw across the horizon there using that and it'll straighten it up automatically. I've then gone back to my colour settings and I cracked open the HSL mixer. So that golden light just in the right hand corner there, I want that to be a little bit more prominent. So I've selected the targeting tool, I've tapped saturation, and then it's just a matter of holding my thumb over that and sliding the saturation up a little bit. And so you can see it's made changes to my oranges and my yellows, but it's definitely more heavier on the orange side. But it's keeping it consistent, it doesn't look too orange heavy. So I still want to balance out the colour a little bit more. So I've opened split toning and I've just warmed up the shadows just a little bit. I then zoom in and add some sharpening as well as a little bit of noise reduction. I've then applied a lens correction to remove any vignetting and distortion. So this part's probably a little bit heavy-handed, but for the sake of demonstration, I've then zoomed in and done some spot healing on some of the poles that no one noticed before, sticking out of the water. I've then gone back to the light tab, opened up my curves, and I've made a few adjustments in there. And so you can see I've got multiple points. Again, you can add as many of those depending on how granular you want to get with your adjustments. I've then gone back to the effects tab and I've added a little bit of grain. And so I know I did some noise reduction a bit earlier. The reason I've done this is I'm not really that keen on the noise that you get coming straight out of a camera. But I do love the look of the grain that you'll get on a high ISO roll of film. So by cancelling out my camera noise, I effectively clean the slate there. And then it's just a matter of bringing in a grain that I have full control over. So I can change the size of the grain, the roughness, and I can really sort of give it a look that I'm more happy with. And then that's it. I'm really happy with that. If you have a look at the before and after, it's quite a large difference. The thing that I find really wild about this is that even though I've done the full edit on my iPad, I haven't sacrificed anything by not doing it on a desktop. There's not a single tool that I would have used on the desktop that hasn't been on the iPad. And the final file that I'll export is no different at all than what I would have done otherwise. So I just want to step back from the technical stuff in Lightroom for a minute. And I want to quickly run through some workflows that I use, mostly my wedding work.
May I ask just a quick question?
Of course.
Can you bring in raw images to work on your iPad?
You can. So this is this little section here. We'll go through some importing and file management stuff. So as a wedding photographer, and I know there's a lot of you in the room at the moment, well maybe not a lot, this corner specifically. And I fully understand that not everybody here shoots weddings. I'm sure you'll be able to find some sort of practical application here that fits you. So when I'm shooting, I'll get a little bit of downtime during the evening between formalities, usually around my dinner, where I just like to quickly sit down and knock out my client previews. So that's something that I used to do the morning after. It's now something that I can do then and there. So there's a couple of ways to do this. And I know a lot of people use the wireless transfer feature on modern cameras. I generally steer away from that because what you'll actually find is the file that you're then sending across to your phone is just a JPEG. And there's not that much latitude in that for editing. So the example that I've done here is I'm using the updated Files app in iOS 13. I've also got a Lightning to SD card reader, but if you're using CF cards or anything like that, you can also plug those in via a USB dongle. So what I've done, I've plugged my SD card in, I've cracked open files. You can see my SD card popped up here. So I've selected that, I've drilled down into the actual file structure there, and I'm just going to pick out 10 photos. So I've already got a fairly good idea at this point what photos I want to pick. So scroll, scroll, scroll. There's no fast way to do that part. Select my 10 photos. I'm then going to copy them off the card into another folder on my iPhone. And that's just so that I'm not editing directly off the card. I don't want to corrupt that in any way. It's not likely it'll happen, but I don't want to tempt fate. So copy them across, unplug the card. I'm then going to go back to that folder I've just created, find my 10 photos, select all of them, hit the share sheet, and then tap Lightroom. And so you'll get prompted with something like this. So 10 shared photos will be imported on next app launch. So launch Lightroom now, and then the photos will pop up. And so you can tell they're RAW files because it will very clearly tell you that they're RAW files. If they were JPEGs, it wouldn't say anything. And that's when you might need to take another run at it. So the entire process here is going to take me about 15 minutes. So I'll quickly go through, I'll apply my preset. I'm mostly just changing white balance and exposure at this point and just really plowing through it pretty quickly. But I want to get it right and I want to get the best file coming out that I possibly can. And the reason for that is these are the 10 photos that bride is then going to show everybody. So it's effectively the single best piece of marketing that I can actually do at a wedding without like throwing business cards at everybody. And so all these guests have just seen how I work as well. And so now they're actually seeing the fruits of that labour too. So they can tell, I guess, that I'm not actually a hack photographer. So I'm exporting them out. I'm just going to text them to the bride just then and there. Chances are she doesn't actually have her phone on her at that point. So before I take off, before the end of the night, I might just sort of casually mention, oh, did you check your phone at all? She's going to sprint around the room. She's going to show everybody these photos. And you usually get a text like that at the end, which is kind of nice. Another feature that I've been making a lot of use of in iOS 13 is being able to plug in external hard drives. So if I'm traveling and I really want to quickly make a backup of my cards, this is how I do it now. And this was a deal breaker for me when I was traveling, is not being able to actually make a copy of a card without some sort of weird like SD card reading hard drive or something like that. I can now do it on device. So it's just a matter of plugging in a USB hub. I've got my SD card plugged in, as well as a thumb drive and an external hard drive. And then it's literally just a matter of dragging it from one place to another. So on the left, I've got my SD card, and on the right, I've got my external hard drive. So I can completely bypass putting things on the iPad. I've got a relatively low capacity iPad. I can't store that much on it. So I'm bypassing that and just going straight to the hard drive. And this is a really good way of making really quick backups on the go. So as far as getting work done on an iPad, I would say that my two biggest concerns that I mentioned at the start, editing and backups, is completely solved. This is it. So there's heaps that I've really skimmed across here, and there's a lot of stuff that I've just missed altogether. And so as Chris said, we'll be launching a class happening on the 15th of December. And that'll give you just a little bit more time to really dive into all these features with me at a bit more of a relaxed pace. So it'll be $99. There'll be 8 places in that class, so get in quickly. But just to wrap things up, I just want to quickly say this. I'm not sponsored by Apple. I'm not sponsored by Adobe. I'd like to be. But I've got no personal investment here. These are the tools that I actually use, and I use them because I love them, and I use them because I actually believe in them, and I rely on them, and I think that they're very good. And I honestly think that that's the case for a lot of people in this room. So before we finish, I just want to challenge you with this as you're sort of leaving today. Have a think about where you might be able to fit Lightroom for mobile into your workflow. Because after everything I've just shown you here, I think you might actually be surprised at the amount of places where you can actually make use of it. That's it. Any questions?